Today we are going to look at a case which not known by many but is as disturbing as many of the cases out there. Join me as I look into the cross-dressing killers here on Corras Investigation. Now, before I go into the killings, we must first look at the early life and the meeting between the cross-dressing killers. Samuel Jacques Coetzee, often called by his middle name, was born in 1971 in Johannesburg as one of two children in a middle-class family. He lost his father at 3 and preferred playing with his sister's dolls instead of with the other boys at age 6. His mother, worried about this, spoke to a psychologist who said it was due to his father's death. Coetzee secretly wanted to be a woman and took growth hormones. He dropped out of school and ran away at 17, but later returned and was conscripted into the army. He struggled during service and attempted suicide in 1989 by overdosing on pills. While recovering in hospital, Coetzee told his mother he wanted to be a woman, but she could not accept this. After his recovery, he moved into his own apartment and worked briefly as a salesman for Automobile Association of South Africa. Coetzee often brought home strangers for sex, including a 30-year-old man named John Frank Brown, who moved in after they developed feelings for each other. Soon, Brown became physically abusive, but Coetzee stayed because of his sadomasochistic tendencies. This couple was frequently seen by all gay bars, where Coetzee gained fame as a drag queen, winning beauty contests under various aliases. Although Brown was either jealous or disapproving of this, he did not urge Coetzee to stop, as his performances provided financial support for them both. And now we get into the killings of the cross-dressing killers. The first murder committed by Coetzee and Brown occurred on 30 August 1993 when they met 35-year-old drifter Chris Anderson. They invited him to their apartment where Coetzee had sex with him while Brown watched. Brown became angry with Coetzee when Anderson performed acts he could not, leading him to grab a piece of drilling equipment and stab Anderson in the neck. To ensure he was dead, Brown strangled him with a tie. They dumped Anderson's body on a gravel road near Atten Gravel. On 4 November, Coetzee and Brown met a 30-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy in a cafe in Johannesburg. After they asked for money, the pair offered to have sex, and the strangers agreed. Following the encounter, they drove the strangers to a farm to discuss payment, but an argument broke out. Coetzee and Brown ended up shooting, stabbing, and strangling both of them, disregarding the bodies nearby. On 1st of September 1995, they killed 27-year-old gardener Havenji Robert Bele after he joined them for sex, and Brown became angry, strangling him and cutting off his genitals before dumping his body in the veld. 3 weeks later, on 22nd of September, they killed 32-year-old Robert Richer after he invited them to his home. They tied him up during sex and strangled him with a karate belt before stealing his belongings and leaving the area. Now we get into the confession and arrest of the cross-dressing killers. Less than a month after killing Richter, Brown was arrested for stealing a pistol and breaking into Cheryl van Staden's house, where he stayed before. While in prison, he contacted Inspector Ronald Spaniers and confessed to the murders he and Coetzee committed. Investigators verified his claims and issued an arrest warrant for Coetzee, who had just been paroled for car theft. Coetzee was arrested on 13th of April 1996. After psychiatric examinations, both were deemed sane and able to stand trial. They were reprimanded in court on 16th of April, set to stand trial 5 days later. And now we get to the trial and the end of the cross-dressing killers. At the start of the trial, Coetzee and Brown both pleaded not guilty and blamed each other for the killings. 10 days later, on 31st of April, Coetzee overdosed in his cell in Boksburg prison, leaving a suicide note for Brown, expressing his desire to end his life. Despite Coetzee's death, Brown's trial continued, and later he changed his plea from not guilty to guilty. He was convicted of Richter's murder, 4 counts of accessory to murder for the other killings, aggravated robbery, and illegal possession of firearms. Brown maintained that he never killed anyone and claimed Coetzee had blackmailed him. The judge did not believe Brown's claims, but had no solid evidence of his involvement in the other murders. Brown received a life sentence, which he is still serving to this day. So concludes the case of the cross-dressing killers. A case where a man who wanted to be a woman could not express his desires due to the time that he was in. And unfortunately, he met up with the wrong person to influence him. And unfortunately, this led to the eventual killings, arrest, and death of Jacques Coetzee. Daisy de Melker was a notorious figure, infamous as South Africa's first female serial killer, remembered both for her chilling methods and a tragic, tumultuous life. Her path, marked by personal misfortune, ultimately led her down a dark road of crime. Join me as I look into the murders of Daisy de Melker here on Corras Investigation. Now, before we get into her crimes, we must first look at her early life and what led her to killing her alleged victims. Daisy de Melker, born Daisy Hancorn Smith in 7 Fountains, Cape Colony, was one of 11 children. At 12, she moved to Bulawayo, Rhodesia, with her father and brothers. Later, she attended Good Hope Seminary School in Cape Town. After returning to Rhodesia briefly, she went to Natal and studied nursing in Durban. Daisy's love, Brett Fuller, died after contracting black water fever on a planned wedding day. After his death, she married William Alfred Cole in 1909, having 5 children. Tragically, 4 of their children passed away. 2 infants, a child with liver abscess, and another with convulsions and bowel issues. The only surviving child, Rhodes Cecil, was born in 1911. And now let's look into her victims. First, William Cole, her first spouse. Early on the morning of 11th January 1923, William Cole fell ill after ingesting Epsom salts given by his wife. The first doctor believed his condition was not serious and prescribed a bromide mixture. However, Cole's health rapidly declined after the doctor's visit. Daisy sought help from neighbors and called another doctor when Cole's pain became unbearable. The second doctor suspected strychnine poisoning due to Cole's symptoms and did not sign the death certificate. A post-mortem examination revealed the cause of death to be chronic nephritis and cerebral hemorrhage. Daisy inherited £1,795 from her late husband's will, being the sole beneficiary. Robert Sprout, her second spouse. On 11th January 1926, 36-year-old Daisy wed Robert Sprout, a plumber 10 years her senior, in October 1927. Robert fell seriously ill with symptoms similar to Cole's, recovering briefly before succumbing to a fatal attack on 6 November 1927. His attending physician attributed the cause of death to be arteriosclerosis and cerebral hemorrhage without conducting an autopsy. Daisy inherited over £4,000 along with additional £560 from Robert's pension fund following his passing. And now we get into Daisy's final victim, Sidney de Melker. On 21st January 1931, Daisy married Sidney Clarence de Melker, a third husband, who was also a plumber like her previous spouses. In late February 1932, she went to Turffontein from Germiston to purchase arsenic under her former name Sprout, claiming it was for a sick cat. Shortly after March 2nd, 1932, her son Rhodes, aged 20, fell ill at work after consuming coffee his mother had prepared, leading to his death on March the 5th. The post-mortem initially attributed his death to cerebral malaria. Daisy's motives for killing Rhodes are uncertain, but it's speculated that financial gain may have played a role, as Rhodes expected an inheritance. Another theory suggests that he may have become a burden to his mother by demanding more than she could provide, leading to a disappointment as he did not show his consideration in return. Despite unclear motives, Daisy's actions resulted in the tragic death of her son, Rhodes. And now we get into the arrest, the trial, and execution. By the time Daisy's former brother-in-law, William Sprout, raised suspicions about his brother Robert's death to the authorities, the police obtained a court order on 15th of April 1932 to exhume the bodies of Robert, Cole, and Rhodes. Rhodes' remains were well preserved, with traces of arsenic found in the viscera, backbone, and hair. Cole and Robert had traces of strychnine in their vertebrae, with pinkish discoloration indicating that they had taken pink strychnine. Arsenic was also found in the hair and fingernails of James Webster, Rhodes' colleague. 1 week later, the Melker was arrested and charged with the murders of all 3 men. The case received significant media coverage. The Turffontein chemist recognized the Melker from a newspaper photo and contacted the police after realizing she had bought arsenic from his store. The trial of the Melker lasted 30 days, with expert toxicologist Dr. J. M. Watt presenting forensic evidence for the Crown. The judge found the Melker not guilty of poisoning Cole and Sport with strychnine, but guilty of murdering her son. The evidence showed Rhodes and Cole died of arsenic poisoning, with traces found in the coffee flask that the accused had tampered with. Despite maintaining her innocence, the Melker was sentenced to death by hanging, which was carried out on December 30th, 1932 at Pretoria Central Prison. And so concludes the case of Daisy the Melker. A case, unfortunately, that started with a tragic life and ended with 4 innocent victims' lives being taken. Gert van Rooyen, a notorious South African serial killer, abducted, sexually assaulted and murdered 6 young girls between 1988 and 1989. He was assisted by his mistress, Joey Hardhoff. Due to later events which we'll discuss in this video, they were never formally convicted of their crimes. Join me as I look into the crimes of Gert van Rooyen here on Corras Investigation. Before we get into Gert's serious crimes, we got to understand when his crimes started. Gert van Rooyen began his criminal career with thefts. He was sent to reform school in 1954 after stealing a car. In 1960, he was convicted of stealing motor spares and clothing. Van Rooyen married and had 6 children and later ran a building construction business with his brothers. In 1979, Van Rooyen abducted 2 girls aged 10 and 13, assaulted them at the Hartbeespoortdam, and sexually molested them. He was released the next day but was later arrested and sentenced to 4 years for abduction, sexual assault, and common assault, serving 3 years before getting released in 1983. Van Rooyen divorced his wife, Aletta, and began dating divorcee Francina Hardhoff, who will be referred to as Joey for the rest of the video. They allegedly accosted victims and holidayed together on the KwaZulu-Natal coast. It is believed that some victims may be buried on the KZN beaches, as the abductions coincided with vacation periods. And now we get into the victims of Gert van Rooyen. On August 1st, 1988, 14-year-old Tracy Lee Scott Crossley disappeared in Randburg, South Africa. She was climbing into a Volkswagen Beetle outside a shopping mall. A nationwide search and hypermarket poster campaigns were launched. On 22nd of December of 1988, Fiona Harvey disappeared in Pietermaritzburg, and a white Ford Bantam truck used in her abduction with a Van Rooyen's building contracting business advertisement was later linked to the crime. On June 7th, 1989, 12-year-old Joan Horn of Pretoria disappeared. In July 1989, 16-year-old Janet Delport of Durban disappeared after being abducted in a shopping mall by a blonde woman. She was later found wandering around distressed but fortunately unharmed. A few weeks later, 9-year-old Rosa Peel of Alberton disappeared. On 22nd of September 1989, 11-year-old Odette Boucher and 12-year-old Anne-Marie Vapenaar of Kempton Park disappeared. On 29th of September 1989, Anne-Marie's mother received a letter claiming she and Odette had run away with boys to Durban. Odette's letter arrived a week later but was posted the same day. The letter is suspected to have been written under duress. On November 3rd, 1989, Yolanda Wessels, the niece of Van Rooyen's partner, also disappeared. And now we get into the final victim and the end of Gert van Rooyen. Joan Boyson, a 16-year-old girl from Pretoria, was abducted by Haroff in January 1990. She was handcuffed, drugged, and sexually assaulted before being locked in a cupboard. Despite her small stature, she managed to escape and altered the police. 4 days later, Van Rooyen was identified by a white Ford pickup that matched the description of the vehicle used in one of the abductions. Upon discovering Boyson's disappearance, Van Rooyen killed Joey Haroff with a .22 revolver and committed suicide with a .357 revolver. And now let's look at the aftermath. The disappearances of Odette Boucher, Anne-Marie Vapenaar, and Van Rooyen, with the exception of Rosa Peel, were linked to Van Rooyen and Haroff following their deaths. Evidence such as Boucher's home address, Vapenaar's address, and envelopes were found in Boucher's garage, while Vapenaar's home contained the envelope and paper used to write to their parents. Despite extensive police searches of Van Rooyen's business premise and house, which was dubbed the House of Horrors, none of his victims were found. In 1996, APSA donated Van Rooyen's former house to the police for further investigation into the disappearance of the three girls. On May 13, 1996, the house was demolished to search for new forensic evidence. The roof, walls, and kitchen were scanned for human hair and nails, and some bones were found but were identified later as non-human. In 1990, a Midrand customer discovered a childish handwritten note at a fabric library stating, "I'm Anne-Marie, my friend and I are with our kidnappers," listed at the address. My friend tried to phone but was cut off. In April 1933, Deborah Sloan, former Fabric Library personal assistant, revealed that a young girl around the age of 12 entered the library before the discovery of the letter. She noted that the girl appeared scared and could still be seen sitting there. In 2007, adolescent bones were found near a holiday resort where Van Rooyen and Joey were known to have visited. DNA testing did not identify any of the victims, and the South African police have not released further details. The case gained public attention through the investigation television series Carte Blanche, which dedicated an episode to the mystery. In November 2007, bones were discovered in a pool near the property close to Van Rooyen's house in Pretoria, but unfortunately nothing came further of this. And so concludes the case of Gert van Rooyen, a pedophilic murderer who unfortunately got away with his crimes and was never formally prosecuted for it. The B1 Butcher is an unidentified serial killer in Namibia who committed at least 5 murders between 2005 and 2007, all linked on the B1 National Road. Join me as I uncover the crimes of the B1 butcher here on Corras Investigation. Now, where does the name B1 Butcher come from? The B1 Butcher was named after the victim's remains were found near the Namibian National Road B1, and the butcher in reference to the professional dismemberment of the bodies. The incident was also known as the Kommas Ripper due to the location of the victim's remains. Speaking of the victims, let's discuss them. 5 young or middle-aged women were murdered in Namibia in 2007. 2 of them were identified. The remaining 3 were Juanita Mabula, who was murdered on 2005, aged 21, Melanie Janse, who was murdered in 2005, aged 22, and Sana Helena Karus, who was murdered in 2007 at the age of 36. All of these women were Namibians of color, fluent in Afrikaans, Damara, or both. The body parts showed signs of freezing or refrigeration, suggesting they were in a cold storage. The method of killing was different, with Janse strangled and Mabula hit on the head. At least 2 of the victims were prostitutes working in Windhoek's downtown Ausplanplatz area. Now, let's get into the murders. In 2007, body parts were discovered in the Kommas region along the B1 in the Windhoek area, belonging to 2 different women. 2 similar unexplained murders in 2005 have also been attributed to the B1 butcher, marking a significant increase in unexplained murders. The head and arm of a recent victim were discovered in August 2007 near Windhoek or Kanhanja, and further body parts in September 2007 near Grootfontein in the Otjosundupa region. The woman remains unidentified, and the police believe the murderer may have moved northwards in October 2007. South African serial murder detectives assisted investigations, but it is believed that the series of murders will never be solved. Now, are there any suspects? Let's get into it. In 2007, German citizen Heinz Knierim was arrested for alleged rape and strangulation of a 29-year-old Namibian. He denied all allegation and was acquitted in 2010 due to the lack of evidence. Knierim sued the Namibian government for damages, claiming he was falsely identified as the B1 butcher by the government and was released from custody. In 2008, Hans Hasselmann, a Rehoboth man, committed suicide in the Mabula murders. He had served a life sentence for 2 previous murders. Despite DNA evidence found in Hasselmann's flat and a letter to the police, evidence was unfortunately inconclusive. Suggestions arose that the B1 butcher might be a lead actor and that there were several copycats. Now let's look at the aftermath. In 2007, women from Windhoek, Rehoboth and Tsumis Park wrote an open letter to the B1 butcher urging him to provide missing body parts for burial and hand him over to the police. In 2010, a human head and arm were discovered on a farm in Rehoboth, raising concerns about the butcher's reassumption of activity. However, the similarities were not evident and the body parts were not found, and the body parts were burned instead of frozen. And like most unsolved cases, the murders evoked criticism to the Namibian police's effectiveness and how they went about this case. And so concludes the B1 Butcher.